Hey, everybody. Welcome to the For the Town podcast. My name is Brian Doback from Streamsong Church. I'm the pastor of Streamsong Church in Doyles Town. And on this podcast, we're seeking to discover the God-given creativity, the drive, and the passions of people and leaders within the Doyles Town and Central Bucks community. And we're going to do this by interviewing local entrepreneurs, local philanthropists, educators, business leaders, people in governance, and employees of all levels, and celebrate them and highlight their particular role in the community, and also give you a path on how to connect with them. So, and at the very least, at the end of an interview, we hope that you feel like you got to know somebody. And we're creating a little bit of community here during this time. So, on the podcast today, right now, we have Jenny. Jenny, can you introduce yourself?
So hi, I'm Jenny Isaacs. I am the Executive Director of Immigrant Rights Action here in Doyles Town. And I live right in the borough. And I know you've got lots of questions to ask me, and I'm ready.
Yeah, man. Something I enjoy learning about people is just more some personal things. Like, tell me about your family. You have a family and kids and a husband and all that.
I do. I've been married for 30 years to actually the first person that I spoke to when I got out of my dad's car as an undergraduate going to college, although we did not start going out until after we graduated. We have three daughters. They are 27, 25, and 18. My youngest is one of the graduating seniors of 2020 who are going to look back on this time.
That's awesome. Disruption. That sounds like an awesome story about how you met your husband. Man, I'm just curious, because I'm married. We have two daughters, ages 5 and 3, so a lot younger kids. I love talking to different husbands and wives and asking them, like, what have you learned as a wife, as a mother, over these years? And I'm taking the advice, so I'd love to know what you've learned.
I always tell people that I have never once regretted delaying anything with the kids. As far as, it's a different world even than it was, because my older two are about, 10 and 8 years ahead of the youngest. And even, her life has, she came of age at a different time. But we had a relatively screen-free household, and really put off exposure to social media and all of that kind of stuff for as long as we could, and had never had a moment of regret about that. They catch up perfectly fast. And of course, I've learned, you learn many, many lessons from your children and from a life partner, if you're fortunate enough to have that environment. And I certainly feel, I learn patience every day, and patience and persistence. And I am definitely one of those people who, when I entered into marriage, I never occurred to me that my husband would become my best friend. I thought, and I now at, the age at 55, that those connections that we have of just sharing life and interests has turned out to be, he really is my best friend and collaborative partner in this project of child rearing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Where did you go to college?
I went to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore.
Yeah, great. Awesome. And what did you study there?
I began as an international studies major and then wound up majoring in writing with a degree in poetry. So they had an undergraduate writing degree. I knew that I wanted to become a teacher, and that is what I did with my poetry degree. I very, very occasionally write poetry. I have 3 times in the last 10 years been the first runner-up in the Bucks County Poet Laureate competition.
Wow.
So,
Very cool.
but primarily I went from from college into teaching first English and history, and then working as as an administrator in a middle school at a Quaker institution in downtown Philadelphia.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I've been to Baltimore. I've been to Johns Hopkins, and that's a great school. I was really impressed with that school when I've been there. When did you move to Doylestown?
I moved to Bucks County in 2001. And my children were enrolled at a school that had relocated to Upper Black Eddy. And so we followed them from Berks, which is where we lived. And then, but we moved from Ottsville, from the more rural kind of part of Central Bucks, down to Doylestown in 2014.
Okay.
And so we have been here in the borough ever since. And I do have to say, we thought we would miss our country mouse existence more, but I love living in a town. I love Doylestown.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of that leads to the next question I like to ask people, because Doylestown is really one of the more unique, in a good way, communities that I've experienced. And I like to ask people, like, what about Doylestown do you love about Doylestown and Central Bucks? Why are you staying here?
Well, in Central Bucks, I was originally drawn to that undeveloped aspect of it. As we got, sort of north of Doylestown, we were in the woods. I really loved the rural aspect of it, and the fact that, sort of my children grew up outdoors. And so what's interesting to me about what I love about Doylestown is now feels kind of like the big city for me. It's such all of these accoutrements of civilization, like the library that I could walk to. And, we're fortunate enough to have an independent movie theater, all these restaurants, and the museum and so forth. And so and yet it's all on this manageable scale.
Yeah.
So I love that. I think it's aesthetically an extremely beautiful city too. I'm kind of a fan of architecture, and so the preservation that happened in the 1960s here in Doylestown, when the community came together to prevent urban renewal, which it's funny to sound about that, think that urban renewal could have impacted a community like this one, but many Pennsylvania towns were really hollowed out at that point. And in Doylestown, I learned shortly after I moved here that the community, the actual retailers themselves, formed together to organize, to create local loans and so forth, so that they wouldn't have to give up, move out, and allow that center portion of town to be knocked down in order to create something that looked different. And so it's preserved its charm and history in a way that is very, as you said, I mean, this is unusual.
Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting to me because I am an organizer, as you're going to hear. So I love the history that is rooted right here in this community, of a community thinking beyond the immediate gratification of like cash federal money, and thinking about what the impact long-term would be on the community. And I feel like that is deep in the soul of Doylestown.
Yeah, very cool. Man, what's your, you mentioned earlier how much you like the restaurants. I always like to ask, what's your favorite restaurant in Doylestown? There's so many good ones.
There are so many good ones, and it is a little hard to pick a favorite, and I feel guilty, but I'm going to say I love Lovebird and Jules.
Okay. Yeah.
I love those. They're owned by the same folks, as you may or may not know. And Jules is the pizza place, and Lovebird is the chicken and tofu place, and at least for me. What I love about them is their commitment to local supply, locally sourced ingredients.
Yeah.
So that's a magic thing too. As far as that, when you walk in there, you see the photographs of local farms where they're actually growing the vegetables that are on the, sort of on the pizza at Jules. And that to me is, sort of allows us to support with our local restaurant dollar also the community that of farmers that surrounds us and helps to preserve Bucks County looking and feeling the way that it is, as well as not engaging with the industrial agricultural system that is in place in so much of this country.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, my wife and I, we just went to Lovebird for the first time. It was a couple of months ago. No, it was more than that. Maybe 4 months ago. We loved it. It was really, really good. And we want to go back, but it was right at the point where the quarantine started. Just before that, and we were like, oh, I guess we're not going to be going back there again soon. So we're looking forward to heading back there. Man, what are I'm curious. What are 3 things that you personally really love? What are your things? It could be anything, like ice cream, movies, reading, whatever. Like, what are your things? Like, what are your 3 things?
I am a reader. It is my escape. And sort of it really sort of lets me go off into someplace else. So I normally am a person who reads books. I had about 12 out from the library when it shut. And I went through them very fast. So now I am getting a lot of electronic books and rereading a lot of the things on our shelves. I read a lot of nonfiction. I love science fiction. I'm a I have wide-ranging tastes, but it takes me away and and feeds my brain. I'm not really a big movie person, and I like to go out to the movies. I do not typically watch them at home. I'm a very fast reader, so also like everything that comes through video is a little slow for me because I can read a lot faster than real life.
Yeah.
What else do I love? I'm a birder. Haven't had an opportunity to do much of that recently, but I do. I love to to walk and identify birds. Gosh, what's my third thing? Sounds very boring, but I cannot come up with. I love to read. I love to bird. I do love, and I'm still working on trying to find a place in my life for creating poetry.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I like to read too, but I have a hard time with reading. I have a lot of books in my library, where the bookmark is like halfway through the book. It's so hard for me to stay focused and like finish a book. So that's something I'm working on. I appreciate. It sounds like you can finish books, right?
It's almost compulsive, actually. I have to really, really, really hate what I'm reading to stop. And sometimes I'm miserable. Like I'm not even enjoying this, but I have to finish it. So it's a little different. People come in all different flavors, right?
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
I am definitely one of those people who once I start something, I'm kind of obsessive about finishing it.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Man, I'd love to ask you some questions about your organization and what you do. Can you share with the listeners what you do? How did you get involved in what you do? And, where and how did your passion kind of arise?
So I guess this started for me because I am a Spanish speaker, basically, and I had become involved as through being a member of my Quaker meeting. I'm a member of Doylestown Friends meeting. Somebody had reached out to us for help with an individual who was looking for housing and had been apprehended by immigration, and this was under the prior administration. But it was in late 2016 when I was contacted, so I had said, well, I speak a little bit of Spanish, or I speak Spanish, and I love the opportunity to practice my Spanish, so I can certainly help with interpretation if this person needs it while we're, in the process of finding him housing. And so I began accompanying him to he had regular immigration. He had to go down physically to Philadelphia to present himself at ICE, kind of like if you have a parole officer or probation officer. So he had to show that he was still around. And I also provided transportation and accompaniment with him on the train, and accompanied him to immigration court. So that I'd had a little bit of exposure to this process. And then in March of 2017, I had taken, this was at a time when a lot of folks in the community, harking back to that organizing history that we know so well. I was invited by Marlene Prey, who is a local activist, to present on a panel for community members who wanted to know how can we support immigrants and refugees in our community. It was the time of the Muslim, immediately after the Muslim ban. A lot of people were just very concerned about the feelings of immigrants in our community. So I was one of the panelists. I had just taken a workshop on Know Your Rights for, with respect to immigration law and an overview of immigration law. So I wasn't really much of an expert. I had literally had 2 hours of training, 2 or 3 hours of training over the weekend. And then on a Wednesday night, I'm giving a 15-minute talk about this. But I was there on that panel. And the very next morning, I was contacted by Marlene called me and she said, Jenny, we've had an ICE raid in our community and 4 young restaurant workers were apprehended this morning. And I was like, you're kidding. And she said, I'm about to go meet with with one of the impacted employers. And I said, oh, well, which restaurant is it? And she gave me the name. And I said, Marlene, you're not going to believe this, but I'm standing outside that restaurant right now. And she was like, really? And I was like, I see you. Because of course we're on cell phones. So we went up together. And I contacted the other, the employer of the guy I had been working with because she had some experience with what you do with somebody is apprehended by ICE. And Marlene was in contact with Blanca Pacheco, who is the executive director of New Sanctuary Movement in Philadelphia, a long-established immigrant rights organization. And she stepped us through, just the mechanics of what to do when a community member has been detained. And at one point, I see Blanca regularly now, and I asked her recently if she remembers this conversation, and she does. She's on the cell phone, right? She's on speakerphone, and she said, do you have an immigrant rights organization in your community? Because you should report this raid to them. And Marlene was like, no, we don't have anything like that. And I was like, wait a minute. There were 75 people in a church last night that, who you pulled together to talk about what to do for our immigrant neighbors. And I said, and we had an ICE raid this morning, and within 4 hours, we had 3 people sitting in one of the impacted employers' offices. I was like, I think we do. And that's really how Immigrant Rights Action started. It was sort of born out of what was already happening. We began to organize around that, and we have never stopped. We began doing we started to to make connections in the immigrant community by visiting the restaurants in Doyles Town on foot and asking if we could do back of the house Know Your Rights trainings. Through that, we began to establish a reporting network so that we were able to monitor the activity of ICE, which was very we saw a big increase in April and May of 2017. There was a lot of activity here. And so we started getting reports and referring people to attorneys when they had been detained so that their families could make a contract individually for representation in the event that somebody had a legal way to fight their deportation. And we also, again, thanks to Marlene and Hannah Howe, who was a member of our group from early on, they put up a fundraising page, and they we crowdsourced some funds that we had to use to pay the attorney who visited them at the place where the prison in New York where they were being detained, in order to, again, interview them to see whether they had a legal case to fight their deportation. And that has been the model that we have followed ever since. Mm-hmm. But the scale now is just unbelievable, that from that day in March 2017 till now, we have distributed over $35,000 in aid to legal immigration cases. Wow. That's over 75 separate cases, because we actually generally have a limit of 500 per case, which is just a drop in the bucket, but is enough to help people with deposits and so forth. So we provide financial assistance, accompaniments down to ICE, down to required supervision visits at ICE, down to immigration court. We also do work with folks who are impacted by the criminal justice system from all over the county. Even a legal immigrant can have their status jeopardized if they have contact with the criminal justice system. And of course, it's a project, a process to be navigated that can use an advocate. We have over 30 volunteers now. Not all of them are Spanish speaking, but they provide local transportation and accompaniments to some are longtime residents of the immigrant community. Some are longtime residents of Bucks County. Some are recently arrived asylum seekers, most of whom were joining family that was already here and who needed, when they got here, help enrolling their children in the school and getting their required vaccinations if they weren't up to date, and also in getting an legal representation in order to follow the legal process of applying for asylum. And as I mentioned to you before we started recording, my organization is right now in the process of applying for recognition by the Department of Justice to be able to provide basic representation to people in immigration cases. So you don't have to have a law degree or be a lawyer in order to do the simple stuff. And once we accomplish that, we will be the only recognized legal immigration services provider in Bucks County. So just as with the work that we do in our group, I mean, if there had been an organization to refer to, we would have done it. But instead, we needed to develop as a group. And I put the emphasis on the we because I do function as the executive director. I am a volunteer, a full-time volunteer. We have a board and a number of hardworking, like I said, almost 30 hardworking volunteers. And we also have been over the last year working to acquire we've received grants that allowed us to hire our first part-time staff member. So our goal is to build up towards a paid staff person so that we can make sure that this service is available to immigrants in Bucks County long after the original founders have moved on.
Very cool. Yeah, it sounds like, part of what you guys do is you educate that demographic on what their rights are, because from what I understand, there's a false narrative out there where illegal immigrants are not allowed to be in the States at all. Can you I think that's correct. Can you dispel those narratives? You can be in America even if you're not documented. You have rights to be in the country if you're seeking a better life. Is that right?
So there's all kinds of, it's a very complicated system that I probably shouldn't go too deeply into because this all came very, like I said, it came very slowly to me and I've built that up over time. I think the biggest, there are two, probably at the heart of the misapprehensions that people often have is that there's a line, a way that somebody should be able to immigrate the right way. That in other words, that there is a process by which somebody can establish, sort of legally gain status. And the fact of the matter is that under our current immigration laws, that actually isn't true. That it's extremely difficult. The options are extremely difficult and basically non-existent, especially for the Central Americans with whom we primarily work. So that some people believe, well, if you're gainfully employed, then your employer should be able to sponsor you. Well, that isn't the case. If you're married to a U.S. citizen, you should easily be able to get to acquire a green card. That is not the case. And these are laws, many of these limitations have been in place since 1996. So it is also these are not new restrictions that we're seeing. They're built in and baked into the system. You spoke correctly when you said that all individuals here on U.S. soil have certain constitutional rights, regardless of how they got here or what their immigration status is. And many of the folks that we work with, the other issue is that they do, sometimes people are unaware that there is potentially a path to legalization, or they could sort of often not affirmatively but defensively, that if they are apprehended by immigration, charged with being in the country without and having unlawful presence here, that they potentially can defend successfully against that. And that is one of the things that we try to make sure, is that everybody has the opportunity, if they do have a path to regularize their status. It's not going to be easy or obvious, and it's not that they were jumping in line against, in some way that where other good law-abiding immigrants were not. But we do want to make sure that people have all the legal support that they are entitled to, and that involves putting them together with reputable immigration attorneys. Unfortunately, it is also a field where there's a lot of predation. People are desperate, they're vulnerable, and they want to hear that the answer is, yeah, sure, I can fix your status, just give me $10,000. And unfortunately, we hear again and again that people have given over a great deal of money to folks who did not represent them appropriately, or who falsely promised things that could literally not be achieved. So one of the roles that we play is to help steer people towards reputable attorneys. They may not always win, but we know they aren't going to rip anybody off. And we also, once we have our recognition as a legal immigration services provider, we can legally screen somebody for their eligibility. That is not something we can do, because it's the unauthorized practice of law. If I just do that as like a buddy, I can't just point at somebody's history and immigration history and say you qualify for this or that. But if I am an accredited representative by the Department of Justice, then I can provide that, let people know what their potential is as far as regularizing their status.
That's awesome. Very good. Very good. Man, what do you love the most about your job, your work? And then what do you love the least about your work?
So I love, I love working with the individuals face to face. I think this is what I love about this job, I guess, is that it's a perfect combination for me, where there's personal, individual, one-on-one connection that is meaningful. And also at the same time, I am working on systemic change to bring something into being that didn't exist before in Bucks County, that has an impact on an issue that isn't just local, but is global, national and global in scale. I am somebody who wants to be able to connect with and remedy what I see as the wrongs in the world, and this gives me the opportunity to do that. I love organizing, kind of like pulling people together, watching something like this take off, effectively kind of, bringing something into the world. Prior to this, in a previous life, so to speak, I had started a Montessori school. And in the same way, that was something that began in our houses as an informal cooperative, where we had the teacher that, and that now is a 501c3 holding nonprofit, thriving place with a daycare center, a child care license, and a school up through school up through kindergarten age in Frenchtown, New Jersey. So that was the sense this has happened to me before, where I've seen something grow from something that it was just a few people together. And again, I have to emphasize, it's just like, you cannot do this alone. So the connection with other individuals in this community who were concerned about immigration and saw the need and were willing to come together and put an incredible amount of time and support into developing this, has been, so I've appreciated that, the teamwork and community that's been built in that way as well.
That's awesome. What do you love the least? What do you least
love
about it?
It's very depressing to understand that when I talked about representing people in immigration cases, doesn't that sound fabulous? What that means is filling out forms. Filling out lots and lots of, it's a bureaucratic process. And I'm really, so it's boring and the stakes are very high, so it's boring and stressful. Wow. So I'm not crazy about that but it's the fundamental way in which I can serve. And so it's good for me because I'm very detail oriented, but I talked about that compulsive finishing and checking and so forth. So I know it is a strength of mine, but it doesn't mean it's fun. Like, I'd much rather be giving slideshows and giving talks, or driving down to Philly, and entertaining somebody on the train who is going to a stressful event. And I feel like my role then is just to be as cheerful as possible and sort of talk about the legend of Billy Penn's hat, and in Philadelphia, and kind of play tour guide and so forth. So I love getting to speak Spanish. And I hate seeing the many ways in which our system is just stacked against these folks who, as you said, are here just to make a better life for themselves, and who have to contend with so many challenges. So,
and besides that alarm clock and a paycheck, although I think you said you don't get paid, you're a volunteer, but just pretend you get paid. Besides an alarm clock and a paycheck, what wakes you up in the morning?
I have to admit that I am a fiendish coffee addict. And I literally, I wake up in the morning and I'm so excited to be able to get downstairs so the pot is set to go off before I wake. And I just I come bouncing out of bed because I can't wait for that first cup of coffee. So that is both a ritual, but also literally what I look forward to in the day. Sometimes when I'm setting it up the night before, I can't wait to wake up.
That's great. Yeah, it's hard to have a conversation these days without talking about the pandemic. I just wanted to ask a couple questions. I don't want to talk too much about the pandemic because it's such a huge part of our lives right now. I think we're all trying to get away from it, but I think it's fair to ask some questions how is this pandemic impacting you? And also, your organization.
So it is interesting, if you kind of squint at my own home, things aren't so different because my husband works from home. And I also, although we have an office, which I am sitting in right now, that's only because I was having a meeting in it earlier, working on this DOJ packet. I mostly use the office for meetings, and I do a lot of my work on the kitchen table or out and about. So in some ways, it's not it hasn't changed so much. And we are an essential business, so we were able to continue open. So I can have people in here if we cannot accomplish what needs to be accomplished, remotely. So of course we have masks. I have my mask. And one of the things that has affected it has affected our work in terms of the lack of I have far fewer activities that people are needing transportation for. The immigration courts were closed for non-detained hearings. ICE, however, was still open and asking people to come down. And I felt like I couldn't ask my volunteers to. Normally, we escort people on the train to show them how to get in and out of Philadelphia on themselves. So we switched to driving people in and out of Philly. And for the most part, I've done a great deal of that. A lot of my volunteers are older or come from high-risk households, and I didn't want anybody to be, put in a position where they were at risk. So we're just slowly, as with everybody else, as we monitor the situation and watch that, sort of this reopening unfold, we're going to step into. We're looking forward to being able to meet face to face. We have monthly public bilingual meetings in Doyles Town, and those went online. We hosted a big roundtable for businesses, agencies, programs, and services that work with immigrants in Bucks County, and we had to take that. That became virtual as well. It was wonderful that we had that already scheduled, because by the time it rolled around, it was April 15th, and we had wanted to talk about what the resources were during the pandemic, because I don't want to omit the observation that these closures and the economic impact of COVID-19 is impacting the immigrant community in a tangible and immediate way. So many of them work in restaurants and other places. So there's a lot of people who are out of work. That's going to be true throughout Bucks County. The most vulnerable populations are going to be, are already being affected. And then, of course, the immigrants that we work with, those who do not have Social Security numbers, are not eligible for any kind of federal support, and extremely limited state and county, county supports. And so that is, that causes some heartache. We were fortunate to be able to be part of a statewide effort called the Pennsylvania Immigrant Relief Fund that raised or that allowed us to distribute some immediate cash assistance to individuals who we knew were particularly desperate. And we have a little bit more of that funding on its way, so that, we don't have a lot, but we can at least, sort of help the absolutely, most desperate situations that we see out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. What are you learning about yourself during this time? This time is so unique and crazy. I think it's got everybody just kind of like reflecting, reevaluating. What are you learning about yourself in this time?
I guess I am learning that I am very, very bad at I have an abundance of tools to cope with stress, mm-hmm. and to cope with uncertainty, and to keep myself sort of spiritually fit and mentally stable during a time like this. And one of them is physical exercise, which I've also been limited by because I sprained my knee early on in the during this situation. So I also couldn't walk for a while. And so that was really problematic. But I also learned, you get into these moments of just like self-pity and despair or crabbiness and poor me and why me and so forth. And I just am always just continually shocked by the fact that I can't make use of my spiritual community, my Quaker meeting, the many sort of things. So, I mean, I have to laugh. I'm just like, it's all out there for me to use. And so when it comes down to it, being in a super bad mood about things is really my choice. I've just like decided that everything is going to be terrible today.
Yeah.
And I just have to, I just have to practice pulling myself back out, laughing at myself and saying, yeah. All right, why would anybody choose to be in a terrible mood?
Yeah.
Right. Why?
Mm-hmm.
So
what's during this pandemic, what are you grateful for despite this pandemic?
Well, one thing I'm grateful for that was directly caused by it, because my middle daughter, who normally lives in DC, came home with us for the duration. If you had told her back in the middle of March that she would still be here towards the middle of June, I don't even know. But it's lovely for us. We love having, of course, that's the purpose of the child rearing is, that they get, all along. And eventually the idea is they leave the nest. But let me tell you, it's never stops being wonderful for have them home. So at least for me. So so we're grateful. I'm grateful to have her. I think that's helped the family dynamic a little bit too. As her sister, has companionship and she can hang with her dad, and and it's a little bit of a different special, it's kind of a special thing for us. And I'm grateful, of course, for the good health of my family and our loved ones and friends. And, grateful for the energy that I see out there for, striving to try to make this at least a rough draft of a better society. It doesn't, there's been a lot of callousness and of lack of what we're willing to do, and as far as allowing the poor to suffer, regardless of whether they're immigrants or not, is continually shocking to me. Mm-hmm. Continually. Yeah. So this didn't it's nothing new. And I continue to be grateful in the same way that I am for the opportunity to struggle to say, well, what would I like the world to be like, and how can I live in a way that was going to bring that about,
Yeah.
maybe sooner, or at
Yeah.
least model.
I appreciate that, Jenny. Man, what's for the listeners, I want these listeners to walk away having felt like they got to know somebody. And then, if they want to connect, how can they connect with you? Like, how can the people connect with you if they're interested in talking to you a little bit more? Maybe they want to get involved in your work. Like, how can they connect with you?
So we have a website. It's called immigrantRightsAction.org. And so if you go there, there's a website contact form, and those emails come right to me. We also have a Google Voice phone number. It's 267-935-9425, and that rings directly to my cell phone. So, and I pick up numbers that I don't recognize, because sometimes those are the numbers. That's the number that people use to get in touch to say, hey, I need help making an appointment. Like today, I had please help me make an appointment at the hospital because I don't speak English. Can you tell me what happened with my son's guilty plea that he was giving today at the county court? And I had, can I please have an accompaniment to Philadelphia on July 6th when I have to go visit immigration? So those are the kinds of questions that I have. So if people want to get in touch with me specifically to hear more, that website should introduce you to the group. We also have, of course, we have an email list. And so I do send out emails a couple times a month that will contain invitations to our activities and sort of our virtual meetings and keep people up to date. If people are interested in volunteering, I'm delighted to sort of talk about that. People are interested in supporting us financially, that can also be done at our website. And I'm also very, very happy to come to churches or civic groups, or I've been to a number of retirement communities actually prior to this, to share more information, the history, a little bit of the story that you just heard about how we got started, some education about the immigration system in general, and sort of to go into more depth. And so I'm happy to do that. I consider that to be a part of this work, is to bring the awareness of our efforts in Bucks County to the entire, to the immigrant community and to our community of advocates and allies, and folks who want to learn more about
That's
about
awesome.
The situation.
Yeah, appreciate the information. I think that'll be helpful for people listening. Before we close things down here, we want to be a church that prays for our community. So is there any way that we can pray for you, for your organization going forward?
So I think patience and persistence are those two things that we need, and the willingness to use the tools. For me personally, thank you for adding your voice to my own daily prayer of, please, let me be willing to use these amazing gifts and the grace that has been put in front of me, which I should be celebrating at every moment. And organizationally, I think that we are at that exciting point where we're, sort of developing and standing on our own. It is my, firmest and fondest hope that our paid staff will eventually our paid staff person will take over my position. And that this will go on and have an enduring space in Bucks County's sort of ecosystem, if you will, and attending to the special needs of immigrants because they are among the most vulnerable in our midst. And then I would say that a prayer always for those who are suffering, for those who are sick, and for those who are suffering economically. Throughout, well, not just in Bucks County, but in our state and in our country and all over the world.
Yeah. Man, thank you so much, Jenny. I really appreciate you getting to know you more, hearing about and learning about your work. And man, to the listeners out there, you have her contact info. You can learn more about what they do and what Jenny's about by just going to all that information, the website. Give her a shout. And man, thank you so much for listening into this podcast. We hope that you are leaving this having gotten to know somebody. And you can learn about us and follow us For the Town podcast on Facebook and on Instagram, and we have a YouTube channel, so you can look for us on those mediums to continue to follow us and hear more podcasts and getting to know people in our community. That's really what this is all about, is just getting to know people. So, man, thank you so much, Jenny. I really appreciate it. And I hope to, after this quarantine, I hope we could meet face to face sometime. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Although I'll also be happy to give a Zoom presentation if that would suit your congregation's needs or be interested. But thank you. The questions were wonderful. I enjoyed this as well.
Thanks a lot, Jenny. And listeners, take care and tune in for the next one. Peace.